Thank you very much, Martin, for that exciting flight around the building. So we covered all perspectives very well. We looked at the AIoT framework and the know-how kernel at the beginning. We then saw how user requirements are coming into this. And we saw two reference case studies in the building and outside the building. And so with that, I would like to open up to questions. We had some questions already that came in. One of them was directly, so what kind of connectivity, what kind of protocols are being used for these applications in a building? And maybe I'll start with Oliver in this practical context here, before then maybe the CBRE colleagues can add to that also.
Yeah, so for networking the sensors inside the building, we're typically looking at the short distance radio systems, things like Bluetooth, Zigbee, and the like. When it comes to connecting to the cloud backend, that's always a little bit the tricky question, because on the one hand side, using Wi-Fi and using existing infrastructure seems like a good idea, but then on the other side, having IoT devices on a corporate network where also sensitive information is being exchanged, so company sensitive information is exchanged, might not be the best possible solution. So in that case, also something like 4G or a separate network is usually a good idea, either going 4G, 5G, or then having a separate Wi-Fi network, or then a wired network from the gateways, of course. Then.
Okay, thank you, Oliver. Anything to add from your perspective, actually, in regard to the technical side, so to say, of how we are deploying these solutions in a building?
Very similar to what Oliver said. I think it's it represents some of the latest thinking around smart building technologies. One of the things that from a end user perspective that we're finding is a significant focus towards data privacy and security, and that actually itself is a work stream that we have to spend a lot of time and energy and resources to make sure that we develop systems and protocols that especially organizations which are a little bit more financial services oriented to adhere to latest protocols to ensure that their compliance requirements are met. The other thing that we're finding quite interesting is around making data available but in an encrypted fashion, so that a variety of different systems within an organization is able to use that more effectively. Now, data privacy from an end user perspective is a very talked about conversation right now. But I think we somehow have to find a balance between how do we use data with the right sort of protocols to be able to leverage the AI aspects of it more effectively. And that can be done only when all the systems are following similar protocols and are in sync with each other. Which sometimes you have buildings in legacy systems, you have some systems which are outside the network. So sometimes initial architecture design can take a lot of time and marry the modern IoT devices and protocols with the old ones. I don't know if adds another angle to the response.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shobhit. Actually, I want to stay for a moment with a very interesting point you just mentioned, because that also came up in the questions. Data privacy and data security, actually, as well as interoperability on the data layer. Dirk, I know you have been doing quite some work in that regard also, in regard to digital trust, for example, and the principles behind that and how we develop that ultimately. It is not directly now in the AIoT kind of focus here, but it's certainly a very interesting complementary topic. Can you maybe comment very briefly on that?
Sure. So actually, topic of data strategy is something that, if you also look at the framework, you will find is one of the top level topics really, because obviously both AI and IoT are extremely data driven. And what we found is that it's really important to differentiate between the scope of your the scope of your specific AIoT initiative versus the enterprise scope. So typically you will have certain policies, certain infrastructure in place on the enterprise level. And I think it's really important that from the solution point of view, that you manage these dependencies very well. So not only on the technical and interoperability level, but also, for example, on the compliance and policy level. So what kind of data exchange policies are implemented on the enterprise level? How will they have an impact on your specific project? Or if your project even needs to exchange data with external partners, it becomes obviously an even bigger challenge. And this is something that we've seen in general, that a lot of people who start looking at AI and IoT, they think like, I get all my data from the sensors. But I mean, typically, in order to really develop a holistic, digital twin like of picture, you really need to be able to combine real world physical analytics data from the sensors together with more traditional enterprise data, which might be the opposite of real time. It might actually be even batch data. So it can be as simple as, I have an asset out in the field. Now I have some predictive algorithm that tells me that I have a problem. Next, I need to find out who is actually the point of contact in the contract for this particular asset that then comes from an ERP system, right? So you really need to take a holistic view on this.
Thank you, Dirk. That's great. One other question which just came in was how can people benefit from all these experiences, which obviously were made from around the people in the virtual room here, and that's obviously where the reference case studies do come in, and while we are sharing this. And I would like to maybe ask Dirk and Marc again, in terms of the smart facade inspection, for example, where is this already in real life deployed? Where is this happening? I saw some pictures which looked like Singapore. I'm not sure Singapore or Hong Kong. And maybe you can give us a little bit more kind of insights there, and also how people could avail of that ultimately.
Definitely. The facade inspection is live here in Singapore. Huh? Okay. So actually, Singapore is one of those hubs that really we have. It's not good enough. All right. So yeah, what I'm saying, we launched it already here in Singapore, huh? And Singapore is one of the front runners in implementing a periodic facade inspection regime. Huh? Every building older than 7 years needs to be inspected. Older than 20 years need to be inspected at least every 20 years. How do we comply with such requirements? Doing manual cannot be done anymore, right? So we have to go digital. And there, drone facade inspection is one of the solutions. Now, implementing such a digital solution puts a traditional company like TÜV Süd in front of challenges, right? How do we change our operations to the DevOps or the DevSecOps even? So there, the AIoT framework can help. And I think by being part of this conversation and making our learning available through this platform, also others can benefit. I mean, TÜV Süd, as a trusted third party, transparency is one of our brands. That is what we are striving for. Now, if you are going a little bit into the detail, what you mentioned, I saw questions coming by from asset administration shell, a very industry 4.0 related topics. This is all coming together. So synergistic effects between this digital asset management, very much part of the conversation. How do you do the risk assessment digitally? How do you collect the data? How do the data management is a big part of it? Who has access to it? Compliance to data privacy issues. So all of those headaches that operators face, we can now take care of with the digital platforms that we are developing at TÜV Süd, and we are, of course, happy to share more about that.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you for also mentioning some of the challenges you are having as a user, so to say, as an applicant actually of AIoT. And I would like to, while this is maybe in the smart facade inspection area, quite obvious, right? It's a lot easier to fly a drone than having people climbing around the building and putting up scaffolding and all these kind of things potentially, right? So that's the ROI is in a way relatively obvious. But in the building itself, Oliver, the ROI is often not so clear, as far as I can see and as far as I've heard from people also in the community. Do we have some experiences actually there which you can share in terms of demonstrating that ROI also in areas where it's maybe not as clear, like productivity? You mentioned that in your presentation. It's easy to measure energy. It's difficult to measure productivity. How do we go about this?
Yeah, I think a very good question, Thomas. As you mentioned, measuring energy, everything that we have a meter for is easy to measure. And I think, especially when it comes to things like productivity, you cannot just tie a meter to your employee and then figure out how productive they are, right? But there's other means, and I think this is also interesting of what Dirk mentioned a little bit earlier. When you're looking at all the data that is around the company, when we're looking at productivity or health, we have some indicators, but we also have records, for example, in HR systems, like sick days, right? And I think this is, there's still a lot of education that is needed, but we see this around the industry, that the well-being of people becomes more and more into focus. And typically, especially the companies where it's not just the facilities managers, but also the HR departments, which are involved in the discussions on how to equip and how to use spaces, the discussion suddenly becomes very, very different. And this ROI is much easier to prove, because those less tangible values is where the real value is and where you can have the big ROI. I think many of us are familiar with the framework from JLL with the 333, referring to $300 per square foot for employees, $30 for rent, and $3 for energy. So even if I'm saving all the energy, I've saved 1% of productivity. So I think there's a lot of education that still needs to happen also in that space.
Excellent, Oliver. And I would just like to stay with that point a little bit. And Shobhit, you're also wanting to add something, because there are still a lot of impediments, right? We still see the building domain. While we said there are a lot of AIoT use cases in principle, and you talked about a lot of them, it seems there's still a lot of impediments also. The ROI can be in some areas demonstrated, but it's not obvious. What kind of impediments otherwise do exist, and how do we overcome them ultimately?
Yeah, I mean, that's another great question. You know, there are 2-3 key impediments that I wanted to highlight. You know, one is really around you know, changing people's perception, because in building environment, still the popular perception is that if I own the building, or if I own the asset, or if I own the seat, then, you know, I want to be able to go to the office and, you know, have, you know, my space allocated to me for a very, you know, large period of time. And so that I don't want to, you know, move from a fixed or traditional, you know, space allocation environment to more, you know, on-demand, flexible space environment. So there is a requirement to, you know, bring people to a realization that it's easy to, you know, have different experiences on demand, and IoT and, you know, AI-based solutions can help employees or end users have those experiences, you know, when they need to, not that they, you know, when they're actually, you know, visiting a physical space or an environment. So the perception management is something that we think is an impediment. And then as more and more you know, use cases and examples and case studies come to life in Singapore, in Germany, across the region, or globally, you know, more and more people get comfortable, you know, using, you know, such platforms from a user standpoint. Second thing that, you know, I, you know, feel that productivity is a pretty, you know, vast topic, and how do we define productivity can be quite different. For some firms, it's, you know, financial savings, and for some firms, it's about, you know, how do we make more from the same number of resources. So it can be quite difficult to actually quantify that. But the trend that we're starting to see, especially in the building ecosystem and workplaces in general, is that if you're able to, you know, allow for greater, you know, time savings for people when they are using different services and amenities in a building, then actually they are, in generally, hypothesis is that they are more productive. Now, it can be leveraged from two ways. One is that they can be doing, stuff that they were traditionally not doing, or they can be actually, the organizations can look at their resourcing model and repurpose their resources to focus on more, strategic and more different, initiatives to make it all work. So there are a lot of these impediments that we think that can be overcome from, a multiple and ongoing usage of such technology, and sometimes those perceptions go away. And I think that one big, trend that we are seeing, the last point that I'll make here, is that because of the pandemic, a lot of prevailing understanding and belief systems have been really shaken, because when you're not in the office, whether you're productive or not, or whether you are not in the in the physical environment, are you able to really leverage your community? And I think that has paved the way for technology to become even more advanced, and companies to actually focus more and invest more in technology to make those experiences more closer and possible to the end user. So that's another really significant change that we see is happening because of pandemic, fortunately. Yeah.
Thank you, Shobhit. Let me change tack briefly, and let's get CK and Sachin also involved in the discussion. I would like to ask a question which came also from the audience here, and that is relating to where is AIoT best located? The whole question of edge versus the cloud. And that was obviously of interest here also. So maybe CK, can you start to comment on that? And then maybe Sachin can continue.
Thanks, Thomas. And yes, you're right. So when we talk about a lot of such technologies, where there is a lot of discussion about 5G, then AIoT, there's always a question that where these technologies really add value. And when we start mapping them in terms of the benefit they bring, for example, if we talk about 5G, obviously 5G is not a silver bullet to solve all the problem. So we need to look at technically and commercially where they fit in. Similarly, AIoT, as I mentioned in my initial launch talk, AIoT will specifically add value where we are talking about a lot more complex use cases, where we need to drive churn a lot of data and insights, and then the integration with IoT technologies, with the sensors, the platforms, and those kind of things. So AIoT, while has a lot of use cases, but I think the value it brings in is where we have more complex scenarios. And this is where the edge computing also comes in. So edge computing, again, if you map the benefit, is not every use case does require edge computing, because if you can rely upon the data to be sent to the cloud and do the analytics there, it may be better suited for that. But if you talk about autonomous vehicles or cobots on the factory floor, or we need to make the decision then and there, this is where edge computing comes in. So again, I think all these use cases we have to evaluate both technically across the technical stack as well as commercially. Are we not overkilling it in terms of the commercial viable nature of the use cases? I think Dirk, I want to add some points there. I'll hand it over to you.
I just wanted to add, because this is a topic that comes up frequently, and it's not yet covered in the framework in depth, but we do have 2 AIoT Unplugged sessions lined up in March and April, I believe. Yeah, we will dive deeper into this, so do feel free to join us for this.
Excellent. Sachin, is there anything you want to add to that perspective? You have been working a lot in that area also in your former capacity. Is there any kind of insights you can give us in regard to this question, edge versus cloud?
Sure, Thomas, thank you. Sorry, I'm having some trouble with my video here today. One of the things I wanted to highlight here is in the last couple of years, the concept of zero has been evolved tremendously. So when I talk about zero means, in manufacturing or semiconductor industry, we're talking about zero defect. In buildings, we're talking about zero carbon emissions. In automobiles, we're talking about zero accidents, and go on and on, right? And in order to achieve any kind of zero, we need to collect a lot of real-time data, whether it's a machine, whether it's environment, whether it's supporting things. And the real-time data comes with edge processing. That's where the edge really sits. Edge is the device that sits next to the machine or rotating equipment, where you're collecting a lot of real-time data. And everything what you're doing is you're pre-processing the data and sending it to the cloud. Once we are there, we are actually using machine learning algorithms to build new models, and artificial intelligence capability comes in, and you actually create models that can define when is machine going to fail, what's the quality going to fail, when is the environment going to change, and then is there an accident going to happen? Can I avoid that? So all those zeros answers are answered there in using the machine learning capabilities. And then we push the capability back to the edge, closer to the machine, so that now we can make a faster decision next to the machine and stop those things before it can happen. So it's all interrelated. So you start with IoT and connecting the machines. That's the first step, making it smart. And the second step is to take it to the cloud and use and apply artificial intelligence capabilities to make it smart, hence AIoT. But ultimately, AIoT is providing a lot of underpinning technologies for businesses to transform in many ways. So concepts of zero basically connects to the concept of smart. So smart cities and everything in future. So that's my 20 cents, Thomas.
Thank you. That was spanning a very wide picture, actually, which I think is quite nice now to also try to conclude this session, because ultimately we will have a lot more of these kind of sessions. And for example, smart cities, for example, Industry 4.0 and so on, energy and so on, all of these topics will be part of further Ignite calls, which we're going to organize. Now, this session here was recorded. We will share actually also all the presentations, obviously in the interest of building that community, in the interest of building that network of experiences and know-how around. I would like to encourage you all to ultimately join us on this journey. I think we all are believers in that IoT does really rock, and that we need a lot of unplugged sessions and so on in order to get everything out of this, out of these technologies for the benefit of the larger population or the larger community and the economy in general. And so I would really like to encourage you, join us. You see here the link again on the page. Register actually with us. Put yourself on the distribution list. All of that is not a membership network here. It is open for everybody. Everybody is welcome. Everybody is welcome to also contribute. So if you have a specific topic which you would like to explore, if you have a specific experience which you want to share also, please let us know. You can do that through this website. Also, you can otherwise look any of us up on LinkedIn. Also, we are all there, and we would be very happy to get in correspondence and communication with you. With that, I would like to thank all the participants online, also here in the room, the experts. I would like to thank my joint and fellow committee members actually also for going through the effort of setting this up here in the region. And obviously I would like to thank Marc and Dirk specifically, having started that on a global stage and providing a lot of that know-how and the gospel, so to say, which we can ultimately share here also in this part of the world. With that, thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening, and talk to you very, very soon.